Perfect. Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Excellent. So welcome everybody to Beyond a Joke, Who Cares? Question mark. My name is Sharon Lockyer. I'm the Director of Centre for Comedy Studies Research at Brunel University. I just want to welcome people who are logging in on Facebook. I hope there's thousands of people logging in. So thank you very much. So I've been working with the Leicester Comedy Festival for a number of years now, and what we've done, or what Jeff Rowe, as the founder of the festival, has been really keen to have as part of the festival, alongside the performances and the shows, are spaces where we think about themes and trends in comedy. And those have been part of the festival since its early days, and those have grown and developed. And I know yesterday Jeff was talking about how the festival has been organic in how it's developed, and I'd say the Beyond a Joke discussions and panels, they've been quite organic as well. We haven't always had a plan, they've just like, we sort of made it up as we went along to a certain extent. But what they've been are spaces in the festival where the festival can think about what's happening locally, nationally and internationally in relation to comedy, but also society more broadly, and be a space to sort of reflect and think about those issues in more detail. They've often been issue-based discussions, so there's been discussions on comedy and politics, which Kate's been involved with. There's been discussions around comedy and identity, comedy and disability that Simon's been involved in. Yesterday there were discussions or panels on the Live Comedy Association and the Edinburgh Fringe that Kate Copstick was involved in. And there's been discussions about psychology of humour, mental health and comedy, comedy archives. There's been like a massive array of topics that we've covered over the years. And I think it was 2016 that, although I said it's organic, that's going to be contradictory to what I'm about to say, the series became a bit more formalised, and that's when the Beyond Joke series, or brand if you like, came into existence to demonstrate the festival's commitment to having these spaces for a bit more discussion. And so Laura will be able to tell us more, but I think they've become a key part, or an important part of the festival as we've been developed. So alongside the panels and discussions, there's been the Q&As in conversation with comedians, so like Joe Brand, Tom Allen, Sarah Pascoe, Lost Voice Guy. They're all part of the spaces where we can sort of question and reflect and hear from comedians themselves. And given that the festival's 30th anniversary, which is really significant, and given obviously Jeff Rowe is leading the festival, we thought it was a really timely time, or a good opportunity to think about, okay, so what is these series or the discussions, what have they contributed? Are they useful? Or are they little value, or some value, or lots of value, depending on your perspective? But also, can these be developed? What would the festival like to do with this going forward? What would you as audience, do you value these, and what could the festival change or tweak or add to, develop over the coming years? So that's what we're going to be doing today, is thinking about the series, and there might be difference of opinions, but I'm hoping we can have an interesting discussion and reflection on this series. So we've got an esteemed panel here, fantastic panel, that bring a wealth of different experiences and perspectives, which I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your views. And I think if I can ask maybe each of the panellists to introduce themselves and maybe say how have you been involved in the discussions or panels over the years? What's your involvement been? And just for purely to make sure that I don't miss anybody out. So can we start on that end of the row? Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Sharon. So I'm Kate Fox. I for a long time, it feels weird to introduce myself as it's still now, because I'm not performing very much at the moment in these post-COVID times. I would describe myself as a stand-up poet, and then I would explain that by saying, if you say you're a poet who does comedy, not many people come and see you. If you say you're a comedian who does poetry, still not many people come and see you, but at least you get Arts Council funding.
Yes.
Actually, I did that the wrong way around. I can't believe I said that line. So I suppose I was thinking about this yesterday during the Edinburgh discussion. I'd kind of weirdly forgotten it. My peak as a stand-up comedian, I suppose, was that I did do a show at the Edinburgh Fringe at 2013 about not wanting children, being child-free. And that was in the context of having made a living as a stand-up poet for a few years, being on Radio 4 on a show called Saturday Live, doing topical poems, but having this determination, this thing of, I never cracked stand-up, and I just started rhyming, and that was cheating. I want to do a pure stand-up show again. And I did, and the commissioning editor of Radio 4 at the time, Caroline Raphael, came to the show and said, I didn't realise that you did things that weren't poetry and that didn't rhyme. You should talk to a producer who could, make this the show thing. And ironically, I'd been going down to London for years and in Radio 4, but it took being in Edinburgh doing a stand-up show to sort of get the chance to do that. So I did a couple of, just 2 series of half-hour stand-up shows on Radio 4, and I was like, oh, I finally did sort of stand-up, because I hated being on the circuit and wasn't very good, to be honest. Anyway, then, because what I always, sorry, this is awfully long, sorry, I will summarise what I then did. I've always been really interested in what stand-up is and what it isn't, and I suppose that's because of my hybrid position, maybe, as a stand-up and a poet. And I got the chance, I went to an open day at Leeds University in 2014, and they were opening up PhDs to practitioner processes. So they were interested in people who actually performed. There was money available, and they were really interested in the fact that I did comedy and poetry and performance. And so I did a PhD looking at northernness and gender and identity and stand-up. Basically, why is it hard for me as a northern accented woman to be taken seriously or not taken seriously enough? And I interviewed lots of stand-up comics too, and was involved in the exciting world of comedy studies, of which Sharon is a key figure. And anyway, we'll talk about that for now. But basically, I did that PhD and was like, wow, my future's set. I'm going to be a performer. I'm going to be in academia. It'll be amazing. And then the pandemic happened, and now I feel like I'm mostly a writer. And someone going, oh, the world's gone really weird, hasn't it? I don't know how to navigate it as a comedian, poet, performer, writer anymore. That's who I am.
Thank you, Kate. Brilliant. Simon, would you like to?
Can't follow you. But I have a foot in both camps as well. So I'm going to do titles rather than explanation. It's Simon Minty. My day job is running training courses for companies, and I help them manage disability, whether it's employees or customers, whatever it might be. I also work with a lot of broadcasters around representation of disability on television. As well as that, I've hit an age of 50 and can now consider wise, which is disappointing. And so now that you have wisdom, you're asked to join boards. And part of me loves that, but part of me is really sad that I am now not a maverick anymore. Anyway, so I joined the board of the National Theatre, which is beyond a privilege and a remarkable place, and I'm constantly at my depth, but I love being part of it. I joined the board of Motability Operations, which is a car leasing company for disabled people. And then we're going, oh, what a lovely idea. And then I always do this, it's a sort of balance sheet of £10 billion. We buy 200,000 cars a year. It's a massive thing. I mean, it's a remarkable organisation. I started getting involved in this because I ran a team of comedians called Abnormally Funny People. That was for the Edinburgh Fringe in 2005. All the comedians had a disability of some sort except for one. Kate reviewed us. The review was 3 stars, but the words felt 4. It was one of those ones, you could have got that star. But, and the joy is quite a few of them have gone on and are very accomplished in acting and performing and all sorts of other things. And it was a lovely thing to do. So I produced that and I did perform. Generally I produce comedy now, that's my other little bit. There are and I do a bit of TV and I make a podcast because I'm of that age as well. So that's called The Way We Roll, and we talk about disability. So if you're really into disability, it's a good listen. If disability is not your bag, it'll be tedious. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Simon.
Wow, I feel my entire life has been a waste. I'm way older than you and nobody's ever asked me to be on the board of anything. So my name is Kate Copstick. I suppose in realms of comedy, I'm a writer. I've done comedy, sketches, stand-up, all that sort of stuff. Done a lot of broadcasting of various types. Done a lot of producing and directing television and radio. And most recently, I review for the Scotsman. I review for specifically comedy nowadays for the Scotsman. That was not my choice. They made me. And I hope Sharon doesn't mind my sharing that when I was asked to do this panel, I was of the opinion that basically chatty panels like this only exist to keep Sharon in a job. Basically, the more people who don't do comedy and don't have anything to do with comedy talk about comedy and want to know where a diagnosis of ABCD plus Y ampersand will affect my comedy, your comedy, anybody's comedy, people listening to comedy, people thinking about comedy, the more work there is for people who just want to study comedy. I don't think comedy should be studied. It's like, okay, I'm just going to go for it here. My immediate comparison is porn. And sex. Comedy is like sex. It's a feeling. It's a buzz. It can be done in many different ways, and everybody's good at different types. And the sexual church of the metaphorically sexual church of comedy is growing all the time in terms of what is acceptable, even the disabled. I think that if you don't want to do it or take part in it or anything, you want to have the experience. You can get a blow-up doll. You can watch porn. And probably the people on screen, because they're scripted, they're better looking, and they probably do it better than you do, but it's still, there's no buzz. It doesn't give you the feeling as a participant. Now, I'm not sure that what there is to be gained from for the world of comedy and certainly the wider world from studying comedy as an intellectual pursuit. Not that, I don't know whether you read Jimmy Carr's book. There's various brilliant, academically, intellectually brilliant comics who have written. They've analysed what makes a joke work. They're fascinating to me. The kind of woolier, larger, let's do a whole study of comedy. I'm not sure who gets what out of that, other than the people doing it who are being paid. I do think there's a lot to be gained out of people who do it and who have different different abilities going, well, like for example, yesterday there was a whole discussion about the Edinburgh Fringe, which is dangling by a thread as a fringe, but everybody in the room, I'm terribly old, I forgot who was there, but most people in the room actually had skin in the game, and a discussion between, an informed, intelligent discussion between people who have skin in any game, I think is always good, because it gets those people together. You know, quite a lot of the time we think, oh, I never thought of that. As I say, recreationally chatting about the ethos, unless you're going to turn comedy into, which of course it is already, sorry, just contradicting myself there. If you're going to look at it, you know, it is, there's a Greek muse of comedy in the same way there's a Greek muse of epic poetry. If you want to go down the totally academic route, fine. But in terms of people sitting in rooms at comedy festivals, I think the more practical the discussion is, the better. And I am, suppose I better come out as, I am meeting averse, I'm meeting intolerant, and heavily, quite catastrophically, depending on, you know, the day. And I do think that unless something is different at the end of a meeting than there was at the beginning, it's a waste of everybody's time and energy. And as I mentioned, I'm unfeasibly old, and I don't have that much time left.
Do that, yeah, again.
Simon, that was very unkind.
No, it was good. I like what you said.
Can I just, you should have warned me that it was going to be fun, given my extreme age. Trigger warning. Sorry.
Thank you, Copstick. Laura.
Yeah, well, I'm Laura, I'm the Chief Executive of Big Difference, and we produce Leicester Comedy Festival and the UK Kids Comedy Festival, of which the Beyond a Joke series is a part. I've been with the company 2.5 years, so I've been through a couple of festivals and seen the development of Beyond a Joke, and particularly the online development of it, which I think has been really interesting. When we did a virtual festival in 2021, it was completely online. We didn't really know what the impact of that would be, and actually we found there was quite a large audience online, very geographically spread, that we haven't had before, so I think that's a really interesting development. And also, my feeling is that they're very valuable, both for academia and also to engage the industry and the wider public as well. I think it depends what we're talking about and who's in the room, but I definitely think there's very few spaces in comedy, I think, where people can come together and have conversations, and I think this is a really valuable space for them.
Hey,
Can I ask a question?
of course you can.
Please, thank you. I want to know why everybody's here.
Wow, extremely hot sitting next to the street.
Would you like to meet?
No, I'm
Are
fine.
you sure?
The reason I'm here is that I've been coming here to the festival for, I suppose, about 10 or so years since I was free to move around. And I like to come to these talks, which are often held at Peter Pizzeria, aren't they?
Yeah.
Most years.
Yeah.
And I just like to listen to other people's opinions. It makes me think. I never meet any comedians. I see them on television. The ones that I particularly like, I like. And when I get that huge booklet every autumn to look through, I think, oh gee, where do I start, you know? But generally speaking, I just pick up people that I know, people that are up and coming. I went to see Elliot Steele because I admired his dad for so long, and I was looking for, you know, similarities, didn't find any, but so yeah, I tend to come to the talks. I'm booked in for a couple more tomorrow here. Just to hear other people's views. I'm not connected with any of it. It's just, I think that comedy is something that is a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
You can tell a joke to people that you think are friends and they just don't get it. And so you've got to find out what suits you, and that's what I'm doing.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sort of coming in as sort of donning an academic hat. I met Sharon last year in Italy at the International Society of Humour Studies. I'm doing a PhD broadly in humour and its uses in the communication effect, and how my question effectively is can we use humour to better communicate? Question mark. I believe we can.
Yes,
I've got to test that, and hopefully be collecting data later in a couple of months' time. And I'm coming in with an academic, not tilt, if you will. I teach at the university. I teach business, and so therefore I'm interested in how to apply, if I can apply, the use of comedy to basically inform, to persuade people. I say we can.
I agree.
And how do you go about doing it? So we're practical.
Yep.
So I think it ticks your box in terms of you've got to be practical, but I do take issue about there's nothing wrong with just looking at something for the sake of looking at it. It's not nasal gazing. It's a case of.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
I work in events. I work at DMU actually, and I've worked in events for about 12 years. I go to Comedy Festival pretty much every year. To be honest with you, she dragged me along today. She's telling some comedy.
Are you enjoying it so far?
But I do take interest in discussions about developing new things, and I'm just generally an events person. I go to anything. I'm the sort of person that would see a marquee in the middle of a town centre or whatever, and I'll go towards it because it's just something there. I'm really nosy, and it's kind of it's good to not just go to the actual comedy as well, to go to discussions, and this is all very good for my job as well. So
Excellent.
So I'm board member on the for Big Difference, so one of the trustees. So obviously very interested anyway, but also I've lived in Leicester for quite a long time now. So it's been part of my, it's been a thread throughout all of my career and all of my kind of life in Leicester. And so just very interested in kind of how it all comes together and what the Comedy Festival does for the city, and also how that can expand out and do a bit more. Also living the very northern and female.
I think I'm the most north. Radio Man.
Yes, well I do a show on Resonance 104.4 FM, which is London's first radio art station. So I was interested in the potential of perhaps, something coming out of this that could be broadcast on Resonance. I'm interested in the sort of analysis of humour, I suppose, the things which are becoming sort of perhaps more taboo that weren't before. Came to one of these events, I think was it 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
One of these talks which was held down in the city, and I think there were probably 2 people in the audience then, and that was us. So it's kind of like a
quality audience.
Absolutely, thank you. So it's a sort of niche kind of subject which that interests me as well. The fact that we went to one thing last night in a pub, and it was absolutely packed. I mean, it was so full. It was too full, and in fact we left before it started because I thought it was too full. I didn't like the environment. So there is this degree of popularity in certain events, whereas something like this, which is perhaps more serious, doesn't seem to attract the same.
Don't rub it in.
They're all online.
I suppose I'm just quite interested in the psychology of everything that we do all the time, I suppose. So I like this sort of event where you can hear from practitioners and so on. And I suppose I'm interested in the subject itself in the sense of can it change anything? Should it be changing anything? Is that the job of comedy? Well, it's all of our jobs, I think, in a sense. Whoever we are, whatever we do, that would be my view on it. We all have a responsibility in some way. That sounded too puritanical about life, but how far can you go with comedy? What is, all of that stuff. I'm just interested in how far we can go with this, and is it likely? Can we change? Should we even attempt to change anything, or should we just remain funny and entertaining? But I think there's a space for all of it, really. But that's my.
I'm so sorry. Completely.
That's
bulldozed
really,
my way in there. I'm sorry.
No, that's really. I'm really pleased to ask that question because there are lots of different reasons why you're here. And I think there's probably lots of different reasons why we are each on the panel. So to get a sense of where you are coming from and why you come, I think is really helpful for the festival to maybe think about what does that mean in terms of development and things like that. I just wanted to ask Kate and Simon, so Laura, you've said about the value, Copstick, you know, how they might not be as valuable as some of the other panelists might think they are. So Simon, I know you've been on a number of the different panels and discussions. I suppose, why do you do that? What value do you feel they have?
It's a very brutal, honest question, which is it's a lot easier than stand up. This is a lovely way of talking to people, ad-libbing, and just having a nice time, and I like that. And also being more on the producer side rather than performer side. Michelle, who's at the back there, and I went to see a show last night, and we were talking about it this morning, and I was saying, well, that lineup wasn't quite right, and they could have moved that around, and that last two jokes, if they'd flipped that would have made that much better. And it was a different way of thinking, because it's still a great show, but there was things that you can do. So I do like a bit of the analysis. I think I did one beyond the joke, which was around disability in comedy, and that happens a lot, and I'm still cool because I think they are important. I think there's a really subtle bit that is not measurable, so it doesn't get Arts Council funding, but it's still important, which is every piece of work I've done for 20 years, there are panels, so we get industry experts, we get the writers, the producers, the directors, the performers, and you've got this panel of disabled people, and we have this chat, and I remember for years I was exhausted because we just yab, chat, and I couldn't see the shift, I couldn't see the change. I now do see the shift, and I do see the change, and I think it's twofold. One, it's just because it's been going on forever. Eventually, it started to get through. I also think now, when I talk to broadcasters, when I talk to festivals, when I talk to wherever it will be, employers, business, there are real-life disabled people in there who are now part of the fabric of it. So it isn't just outsiders all the time trying to get things to change. There's people within, so we've already got mechanisms. And I think it's really hard to measure the value of these. I do agree with Kate in the sense of sometimes they can be a bit, well, what's the point of that? But I've had little moments, I just remember sometimes being abroad and someone will find me in a lift and say, I saw you speak on that panel 17 years ago. You said that, and that stayed with me, and then because of that, that's what I've done. I'm like, ooh, and you think, that's phenomenal. Now, does that justify all of our time and all of our effort? And it's a little bit, you know, one person, it's that Paul Merton gag, you know, if I've made one person laugh, I've not done my job properly. And then make all of them laugh. But I think with panels, it might be a different bar that we measure. My last point, which is linked back to that performer bit, if I was a performer, would I be a little bit more frustrated because I want to do more? But because I'm not a pure performer in that sense, panel is quite a natural home for me, and I feel comfortable chewing the fat thinking about it.
Great, thank you.
So I am endlessly frustrated, except I haven't been frustrated for the last few years because I haven't cared. But before that, I was endlessly frustrated that comedy was not taken seriously enough. I was like, comedy as a discourse, the way that you can say two things at once, the way you can undercut yourself, the way that you can take multiple positions and shift across them playfully is so important, especially in a polarised world. There is almost nothing more important, and yet, oh, I'm feeling the frustration again. It's coming back. It was there all along, and yet it's hived off, separate. So actually, I suppose technically, even though I love this comedy festival, a bit frustrating that it's a separate thing. Like comedy is separate to all the other things because it's not. It's frustrating that. In academic departments, even though there is now comedy studies and you've got the Institute of Comedy at Brunel, which is a huge achievement, basically it's really hard to get funding for comedy because people think it's not very important. It's just entertainment, it's just jokes, it doesn't change anything. All of this is an accident of history. Like, it's really weird as a society that we've separated seriousness and humour's at the bottom of a hierarchy. That's not, it doesn't have to be like that in other societies. In some societies, for example, in funerals, I'm now going to be very vague. Sorry, this is as vague as in some African societies. Sorry, somewhere, in certain places. In funerals, there's a figure whose job it is to make jokes because it's recognised that at the end of life it's as important to laugh. In fact, probably more important than at other points. So for me, any discussion, any moment where people break beyond it's just jokes makes me rejoice. It makes me very happy. And comedians often won't do that because they're like playing both ends at once. I went to Tom Stade's newest show the other week and I really enjoyed it. And his explicit position was, just jokes, I'm not changing anything. And I was thinking, hang on, he is such a craftsperson, such a skilled master of being white, cis, middle-aged bloke, taking the mickey out of his own position, out of his age, out of wokeness, out of by playing about 50 positions at once. It was very sophisticated. It was far more sophisticated than any discourse in any other art form or public cultural representation, I would say. I'm sure he wouldn't thank me for that review, but it was far more interesting and multi-layered. It's not just jokes, but we hide it off. That's my actual position. But the reason I haven't cared about that since the start of the pandemic is I suppose I did begin to feel comedy is actually at this point powerless, stagnant, not connected to the rest of the world. Most of the stand-up comedians I know are very unhappy and burned out. That is very much something I would love to talk about in future panels. And I think we've got a crisis in stand-up comedy at the moment. I would go so far as to say, and I do think panels might be one of the means of, I don't know, if as a form we could just have a bit more legitimacy, be more connected to things like universities, sources of funding, then that would be a great thing, actually. Yeah. Oh, I still care. Who cares? Me.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, who cares? Obviously, you play yourself, Kate, Simon, Copstick probably less so. Yeah, Laura, yeah. Kate, do you want to say? I can feel you wanted to say something.
No, I think I just disagree so comprehensively and deeply and utterly that, number one, should I
just go for it? Can I do a little question? Because if I'm being cheeky, if they were a waste of time, you wouldn't be here. You'd go, not coming, they're a waste of time. But you're sitting here and you've got a point of view, so there must be something you still quite like.
No, I'm not saying they're all a waste of time, but also I will be absolutely brutally frank. You can get me to do pretty much anything by flattering me.
Got you.
So basically, I was told that Sharon wanted me here, the chef wanted me here. Yeah. I was a very important. So basically, yes. I will bend over and take out the arse if you put it nicely enough. And I'm not saying that I think discussions are great. I just think it's dangerous to have, there's comics and then there's people who talk about comics. And, quite frankly, apart from anything else, the ones who talk about comics tend to be better funded than the people who actually do it. Okay, number one, how dare you say that Tom Stade doesn't get the right to call his stuff just jokes. If he says it's just jokes, it's just jokes. Number two, it's incredibly dangerous to say that comedy ought to be doing anything. It can, it is a blindingly powerful tool. It's, back to sex again, it's the Carlsberg special brew of thought, in the same way in Scotland we call Carlsberg special a leg opener. So comedy can be a mind opener. You package something. And people are laughing, and in that moment when they're laughing, you get in there with something, and they will remember it. There's a lot of scientific stats to go, they will remember it, and they're open to it. All of that. It's not a must. That is not comedy. That is one of the ways in which comedy can be used as a tool. And nowadays, for example, spitting image. There was a massive, obviously I'm probably the only one here old enough to remember it, but the Liberal Party pretty much said that the David Steele weenie puppet brought down the Liberal Party because it implanted, because again, mind open, David Steele is forever identified as this little tiny pathetic person. It's incredibly powerful. Satire, all these different things that you've mentioned. But, water is not just something that keeps ships afloat. That was a terrible metaphor, but it was the best I could come up with just off the cuff there. And the more time we spend discussing comedy, the more danger there is of just comedy, just jokes, whatever, being made to seem less. And which is what I took one of the...
But I'm saying that they're more, because there's no such thing as just jokes.
Of
and
course.
everything you've just said reinforces the point. There's no such thing as just
Yes,
jokes.
there is,
It's
and it
a
doesn't get any credit because people are looking for the subtext or the this or the that. And I think that nowadays it's getting more and more dangerous. One thing which, I don't know, it's all going to go the same way, but that needs to be discussed in what young people would call a safe space, is the fact that probably 50%, maybe more, maybe 60% of comedy that can actually or could potentially do things, move mountains, change people's minds, can't be said because it's not politically correct.
And that was the skill of what Tom Stade was doing, because he said everything that can't be said, and he did it in the sort of magic circle.
What did he say that
the
couldn't be said?
bounded circle. Well, he was talking quite a lot about trans issues in a way which generally would, if he was J.K. Rowling, I suppose, if he was using only a straight discourse, he would have been cancelled, I suppose. But comedy allowed him to leap between different positions, and on the one hand appeared to be saying, look, we're a diverse society now, I really approve of that. Also, it's kind of weird though, isn't it? Also, everyone's weird though, aren't they? That's really hard to say if you just say that straight. But a comedian can say it because they're in the... So, yes, there's a magic circle of comedy. We've got comedic license here. We can say what can not be said, usually. And maybe that circle is bounded because we've, for safety as a society, given it a boundary. But actually those boundaries don't really hold now because we have social media. We have comedians on news shows, on the telly. Not Tom Stade, I suppose. But nonetheless, it's all become porous. It's really hard for something that's just a joke to stay as just a joke.
I mean, one of the... I don't agree with that, but we'll agree to differ. I hope. But otherwise it's going to get very because you're bigger than me and I've got a blinding headache here, so I'm not going to come off well. But some of the most powerful, the ways in which comedy has moved mountains of several sizes, because there's so much discussion, not around comedy, I'm not talking sign language, around comedy. I was talking to Simon earlier, 2005, without, hours of chat and thought and discussion and panels and Lord knows what else, Simon brought a show called Abnormally Funny People to the Edinburgh Fringe. Now, I remember sitting with people, because you go through and you go, oh, I'll review that. And I remember sitting with people going, I'm normally funny people in the fuck's not going to be. And so there was a barrier. And without going through any of the let's test the water, let's do this, blah, 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 and really with pretty much no press or anything, they just came on in a little room in the Pleasance Dome singing, what's that coming over the hill? Is it a monster? Which you wouldn't even be allowed to do now because somebody would be in a corner crying and having a conniption. But they just did it and kept on doing it. And the word of mouth, okay, a 3-star there, read like a 4, got people coming in. And it's grown and grown individually, they've all got, but that didn't ever come. Sorry, I'm putting words into your mouth here. From a discussion or an anything, and I don't remember there ever really being big discussions. They just did it, and they were funny, and they were very in your face. And I think the more discussion, if there had been more discussion, there would have been less. It would have been less likely that show would have been the kind of tiny juggernaut that it was. I'm going to shut up now because I'm talking too much.
See, Laura, did you say anything more about the festival's perspective on the series and their value?
Yeah, so I mean, I think from our perspective, we want to give people an opportunity to talk about topics that are going to be useful for academia, for the public, and also for comedians. I think that it's a series that's gone on for quite a long time, and we've covered lots of different topics over the years, and whether those things have helped spark anything else, I think we probably need to think about that, about, this topic shouldn't stop here in an hour. What is it that happens next? And I think some of those conversations that were, panels that were yesterday about like Comedy Association and the Edinburgh Fringe, you can't solve everything in an hour's discussion. But maybe that hour's discussion does spark solutions in people's minds, and the people that are on the panel or people who are listening. And I do think that can be really useful. I appreciate there's other things that spontaneously emerge through people's creativity that don't need people to sit around and think about it and have lots of long conversations. But I do think there's space for both of those things.
And what about so I think it's just that let's now sit and think and discuss could there be, no idea what it is, so pointless, but could there be a less formal way, to go to, I don't know, just at some, like a club or a bar where you just go and audience as well come in.
Yeah. So it's like a kind of thought cafe.
Yes. What a brilliant. Write that down. But no, that's a brilliant idea. And because Leicester isn't quite as obsessed with big names and whatnot, and you've got proper working comics, experienced and less experienced, of all different kinds. And it's not just, well, they're with Avalon, so we best have them on. And then we'll have his shit friend because he's with Avalon as well, and we don't get the big name if we don't get the little one. There's proper thinking, intelligent people, audience as well as everything else. And yes, you know what, you may not have noticed, I talk a lot. But it's just the kind of turning it into a spectator sport that worries me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Simon.
Yeah, and it's a mixture of the two, and I really like the idea of an informality part of it. I also think that it is part of a festival, because if all you do is a festival, you go and see 6 shows every day, and it's relentless and it blurs. So these are almost like a bit of a downtime where you get a moment to reflect and think and go, and also, it's like the old school director's cut, or you just get that little bit of insight that you might not have got otherwise. And we all know the people who I'm sensing you're a deep comedy fan, and I love deep comedy fans who are just like, they follow it, they find out about it, and so I think there's still that audience, but I like the informality part, because that might be a little bit more audience bouncing around, see where it goes, so yeah, there's something in that.
I mean, you could even have this, I'm talking again, I said I'll stop after this. You could have a kind of showing too much insight into the BDSM community, but you could have like a themed, you go like Thursday, lots of people are coming who are into stand-up, should be pure stand-up, or sketch comedy is really, or whatever, or Wednesday is safety, where you can say anything you like and nobody's going to throw you out, or you know, just and then you'll kind of know, I'm going to go along to that, because that guy that did Abnormally Funny People Night was there. I mean, he does bugger all the comedy now, but you know, it's quite interesting. But you know what I mean? So you could have...
Yeah, it's a good idea.
And then maybe a couple of 2 or 3 key people who waft around being kind of agents provocateurs.
I do think there's a value, though, in it's people's voices on panels that have a deep experience and knowledge. I think there's, you know, with every art form or event, everybody has lots of different wide-ranging opinions, and some of them come from a place of deep knowledge, and some come from lesser knowledge. And having people on a panel who've got, you know, academic background or really know the industry, who have been comedians for a really long time, I think is really useful in kind of having a standpoint of experience and knowledge.
Absolutely right.
And also I think sometimes the way the panels are put together means that we get a diversity of voices. So it's not the same people who are talking on
I agree with that, but then also when it's a panel, it's at 5 o'clock. Not everyone's, it's like putting together a mixed bill, not everyone's your first choice, is it?
Well, that's a great one. Because I think one thing that we've tended to do with like the panel discussions and with the audience present, and I think maybe mixing that up and doing that differently. Before the panel, we were talking about the pros and cons of online. And whether, you know, could you do online or hybrid, and then obviously those can be problematic. But yeah, I think the informality and the theme's a really good one. I just ask maybe other panellists, any other ideas for the festival in terms of developing the series, whether it's in terms of its format or topics, and then I'm going to ask all of you for your, because I think, you know, you're really, really interested, and I'd like to hear, well, I'm sure the panel would like to hear your thoughts as well. But Kate and Simon.
I mean, I am loving the thought cafe idea. I think that is great, because I do think that would be a very different dynamic. I would love there to be, or would love there to be, a panel about stand-up comedians' well-being, I suppose, because actually they're not happy. It's not a good time to be a stand-up, actually not. And it's worse being a stand-up at the moment, and has been, than be as a poet. At least I did Society of Authors. I got a Society of Authors grant. I got Arts Council money. I did get Arts Council money during the pandemic. I was well aware that stand-up comics didn't. So that would be one thing. And I know that probably is navel-gazing. But
so that's really a really live debate across the cultural sector, and there's probably a really interesting talk here with comedians and other artists. Because it is the lack of well-being is about the economic and cultural setup of the cultural sector more broadly. So I think there's a very interesting conversation there.
Good. And then also post-COVIDness generally. I felt very old school this morning. I took a COVID test, and I was like, and actually, post-COVIDness is definitely impacting how I navigate this changing landscape as a performer. I was interested when earlier, Simon, you said on the board of the National Theatre, now you're kind of, you know, the way that touring or shows are set up is changing, and I suppose all I kind of know, and I just feel so detached from it. I'm like, well, I was touring shows and it was going really well, and now I know that that would be really hard to do. So again, this is sort of thinking from a performer point of view, but actually I think that would be really, we don't have these forums particularly as performers, so festivals can provide them.
Two specific, there's Improbable Theatre who do events called Devoted and Disgruntled, and they're a cross industry, and they're a whole bundle of people in a round circle. And that, I love the title. We're devoted to this, but we're disgruntled because it's really difficult. I would be slightly cheeky and say about, it's hard to be a comedian now and their well-being and mental health. I think it's them and us. I don't know if there's a big change. It might be harder now, but I think that's a relevant thing that's always been. The one thing I don't know if I sound like an old man or a radical, but watching the stand-up last night, two of the comedians, some of the stand-up, I thought was pretty dodge. And I mean, so my introduction to comedy was we get rid of racism, we get rid of sexism, we get rid of ableism, we'll get all of those are gone. And I was listening to 28-year-old stand-ups doing it, and I'm like, that's not great. I struggled to laugh at some of it, and I became overly PC myself, and I'm thinking, hold on.
What did they say?
You know what it was? There was a couple of really cheap throwaway gags about Oscar Pistorius. Now, I'm up for the gag, but one, it was so predictable, it was untrue. And secondly, I mean, it's not exactly topical. There was stuff around trans, but well done. I don't know, and some sexism stuff, it just made me flinch a little bit. And I thought, oh man, how am I thought it shouldn't be like that. I thought we'd moved on, but maybe that's now that's edgy by doing the things that we got rid of when we go in full circle. So maybe this one let me saying, I'd love some older stand-ups and some younger stand-ups and see what truly are. Are there any taboos? Probably not. But what's the trend going and what is the benefit of a trend or not? I'd be interested to see where that would end up.
Yeah, that'd be a really interesting conversation. And I think some of it is that comedy has always been a reflection of society, and we're kind of, I think, for me personally, feels like in a place where, I thought we moved on from that, and actually we seem to be cycling backwards. And
maybe it's ever that. I mean, it's the way it goes. And then there'll be the next generation after this lot will go, those people doing all those shows, we're not doing that anymore. And I'll get back again. And by the way, these are tiny. If it's a 20-minute set, a couple of minutes, it's not like, it was a joy and it was lovely to see. But I just thought, we're going into topics that wouldn't have, or they would have been better crafted, I think is the way to say it. They would have been less clunky.
Yeah. I think that intergenerational conversation is really, really useful. There's not many spaces for that, I think, in the comedy sector for more experienced comics and younger comics to kind of get together and discuss their comedy.
And knowing the age comedians, there's a group who I know quite well, and they're like, it's the circus, not the same as it, but what, you can't double up, you can't do this. And then the young disabled go, you know what, you're so busy out there, I can't be. And I'm like, someone's not quite realised. Some things have changed, but they're not getting the same requests.
I mean, I think in terms of other topics, I'm really interested, because we now have the UK Kids Comedy Festival, in some kind of discussions around children and young people and how comedy can help them and their mental health. I did a radio interview at the start of the festival, and the interviewer was saying, but aren't kids just naturally funny anyway? And I think that's really interesting that kids, and when we're really little kids, we have this natural ability to be funny and to look at the world in this particular way. And I'm really interested in how that changes over time. What makes kids laugh, and maybe as an adult you go and find that funny anymore.
Great, thank you. So, does anybody in the audience like to share or give, share some thoughts in terms of developing the topics or their format, as we mentioned as well? What would you like to see as an audience member?
I got an idea, it just popped up since listening to you guys. I'm talking from a business point here, and maybe it's generating a bit of revenue for the festival as well. And I know, as I teach business, that business are craving engagement and authenticity. And I think the ability to use comedy as a tool in which to engage with your audience, with your stakeholders, with your audience, with your customers, is something which I think business, it's a skill. And I think it's something which they could learn in this workshop. You could flog that to business, you could make some revenue, and I think businesses would want it, they're craving for it. I mean, I can come back to your point, Kate, is I think comedy won elections. Ronald Reagan in 1984, Walter Mondale, and he turned that joke of his age into the youth and inexperience of Walter Mondale, cracked everybody up. From that moment on, you could basically talk about nuclear proliferation. He stuck the knife in. Walter Mondale's campaign from that moment on was dead. He won that election based on one joke because everybody opened up to the guy. And I think that ability, and that didn't come out of fresh air, that came out of script, and that came out of work, and came out of a workshop, or came out of people thinking, how can we get people to like you? And I think having that skill set available to business, I think will be extraordinarily valuable and also potentially profitable for you guys.
Sharon, can I add a little bit? So, for want of a better phrase, I live in mixing, talking to business about a really awkward subject, traditionally disability, but sprinkling the humour. I was trained to be a trainer, and I trained in business stuff. And when I was trained, the night before I'd write these little funnies in, and then when I was delivering it, I then ad lib. And the feedback I got was saying, stop writing funnies, because all you're doing is trying to make them laugh. You're not teaching them anything. So I double whammy. So I pull out anything I pre-written script. And now I just react and throw little comedy bits in. And as someone said, you're in the best position because you're teaching them about something awkward, but they're laughing. And I think Kate and yourself said, if it lands properly, you saved an hour, it's hit them, it stays with them. Yeah. And also, I do want a little that joy as well. I don't want it to be all worthy, over the top, stuff.
I mean, there are I say this to my marketing students, we get 10,000 messages thrown at our eyeballs and our eardrums every day. And that data's old, and that's about 6 years old. You've got 10,000 messages from logos, from billboards and social media. How are you going to get through? How are you going to get through? So you've got to be able to break down those innate barriers, because we simply don't have the bandwidth to absorb that. And comedy, humour, I should say, not comedy is like the process of delivering a humour, I think, of where you can just overcome that and just get home.
Anything else that you'd like to get?
I've got this slightly off the point. I've got an example of finding something out a few years ago. One of the things that I was doing as a voluntary job was delivering books and tapes to the house band through the library service. And we were asked to go and give a talk about what we did. And I just wrote a few notes down. And I thought, well, I'll finish with something funny. And I did. I gave an example of something. And everybody roared. And I felt wonderful. I thought it's like a drug. Just hearing that laughter from that one thing. So I did get a bit of an insight.
Excellent. Thank you. Anything for us to do, or should I say, the festival to take away and maybe think about for, I won't say next year, but next 5-10 years, who knows?
I think, the thought cafe is really nice because it's one of those, you sort of sit here and everything happens and you go, oh yeah, and then you can,
That's right, because there's no table in the way.
It's more organic, it's also less managed, but people, everyone's got an opinion, haven't they? Everyone was talking, and so, you find a little room in a pub somewhere and it'd be really interesting. How much you get from that, I don't know, but it could be quite insightful.
And you'd also be able to go, well, I didn't think much of the old Scottish bit, she was too gobby and whatnot, but I really wanted to hear more from the touchy-feely woman on the end. So you could you can self-edit.
Well, I guess you could do that with the kids stuff as well and get a real feel for what, that's the future, isn't it? The future, and not just comedy, it's arts in general, culture, and we know how much it brings, like you say, it gives you that buzz when you're, if you're on one side of it, you're laughing, but also if you're hearing that and the well-being. And I think there's so many things that are intrinsically linked that it'd just be good to hear from lots of different people, but I suppose maybe this doesn't always feel like the most accessible way, or people are kind of looking at a brochure and going, I want to go to comedy, and like say, unless you're interested in sort of the academic and the conversations, you maybe don't feel like it's a space for you, which is why putting it into maybe a less sort of formal space. I know we used to do it in the pizzeria, so which is less formal, but actually almost a bit of a drop-in or that chatty kind of thing,
Yeah.
possibly. You know from delivering events that it's difficult getting people through the door, don't you? It's tricky.
Excellent. And I know quickly ran out of time, and I know we need to finish on time. So if I can thank you all for your contributions and your feedback, it's been really helpful. And if I can ask you to join me in thanking our fantastic panel today. Kate, sorry.
Oh, come on, you're more than that.
And just to say, if you do want more panels and discussions, Jeff Rowe is downstairs, I think, talking to Joe Bohr about comedy. Is that?
That's been cancelled.
What? Oh no. Okay, so if you want more, you can.
The rest of the
The next weekend.
Next weekend, yeah, there's more Beyond a Joke panels and discussions.
Sorry, Kate, you were saying that you want to see one about comedy and mental health. There is one on Saturday at 11 a.m.
Good link. Good. Okay. Good.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, you can go wherever you want and see whatever you want. Basically. Thank you very much.
Can we do a photo?
Oh, will you?